Hey, it's Emma. Welcome back to my channel. Since I published a video on cracking metric interviews a few weeks ago, lots of people told me that it would be very helpful to go through some real interview questions and answers. So today, I will be talking about a real metric interview question from Lyft. I will first provide a few steps that could be followed to answer that question, and then I act as both the interviewer and the interviewee to show you what it looks like in a real interview. I hope it can be helpful for your interview preparation. Let's dive in. The question is, we have a dashboard tracking our metrics, and the average ETA is up by 3 minutes. How would you investigate this problem? This question is a typical diagnose of a problem type of question, and the target metric is average ETA. Most metric questions are open-ended, and there are many ways you could approach them. As a general reference, I have covered a few steps you could follow to answer this type of question in a previous video. You could get the link in the description below. The goal of this framework is to help you get a sense of how this kind of question could be possibly answered. But if you could come up with anything else that's more related to the question itself, it's better to talk through that in the interview rather than following the steps rigidly. As that being said, let's briefly recap the steps that I have provided. Again, if you're interested in learning all the details, feel free to check the link below. Specifically, there are 6 steps. The first step is to clarify the scenario and the metric to make sure you fully understand the problem. The next few steps investigates the issues from different perspectives. Step 2 looks at the time factor and investigates whether the change has happened suddenly or progressively. Then you could dive into each possibility. We could also check if other products or features by the same company have experienced the same change, which may lead to a much bigger problem, and we will need to look at the metric of the entire platform. Also, we could segment the metric by user demographic and behavioral features to isolate the issue. Depending on the definition of the metric, we could also decompose it. Finally, we want to summarize the overall approach to show the interviewer that we have a systematic approach to solve this problem. Note that the order from step 2 to 5 does not matter that much, so you could definitely change it. Also, you don't need to go through all of them. You may only investigate 2 or 3 of them depending on the feedback from the interviewer and the time of an interview. But the key here is to be systematic. It's important to convince the interviewer that you are organized and not throwing random ideas at him or her. Now you have a good understanding on how to approach this kind of question. Let's see how we can answer it in a real interview. I'm gonna act as the both interviewer and the interviewee to show you one possible way to answer this question, as well as the interaction between the interviewer and the interviewee. I'm gonna be your interviewer today, and let's start with the metric question. We have a dashboard tracking our metrics, and the average ETA is up by 3 minutes. How would you investigate this problem? Okay, so the average ETA has increased. How do you define ETA? Is it defined as the time it takes for the driver to pick up the rider, or the time it takes for the rider to arrive at the destination after he or she is picked up? It's the time it takes for the driver to pick up the rider after a riding request is sent. I see. So how is the average ETA defined? Is it measured by hour or by day? It's aggregated by day. Thank you for the clarification. To start diagnosing the cause of this problem, I will begin by investigating a few factors to understand the context in which the increase of average ETA was detected. The first thing I want to check is if there's any extreme value that has impacted the metric, because average value is affected by outliers. We can set the threshold, say 99.99% of all the ETAs, and if there are extreme values that are much higher than that threshold, then we can further investigate what happened to those ETAs, such as if the data was collected correctly or if the large ETAs were due to some technical issues. But if there's no outliers, then the cause is still there and we can dig deeper into the data. Does it make sense? Yes, it does. So if there's no outliers, how would you proceed with the investigation? Sure, if no outlier can be identified, I will then focus on the time aspects of this change. Basically, if it has happened suddenly or progressively. If it's a one-time thing, meaning that the average ETA suddenly increased on a particular day, then there are a few factors I will look into. First, I will check if we change the algorithm to calculate or predict the ETA. I mean, ETA is an estimated value, not the actual time of arrival. So I assume it is predicted based on an algorithm. If we change the algorithm to calculate it, it may cause the increase of ETAs. Second, I will check if we change the algorithm to match riders with drivers. As you mentioned earlier, it's the time it takes from a request is sent to the rider is picked up. So if we have changed the matching algorithm, it's possible that it changes ETAs. Finally, I will look into if we modified anything in the data collection process. Anything that has changed the data may lead to the change in the prediction. So those are a few things I would check if the average ETA goes up suddenly. But if it has happened progressively, it means that the trend has been going up for multiple days. Then I'd look at different aspects. First, I will look at the historical trend and see if it follows a weekly pattern. It's possible that one day of the week has higher ETAs than others. But if that's not the case, and the average ETA turns out to be increasing steadily for multiple weeks, I would compare the ETA against the actual time of arrival, i.e. the ground truth. Then we are facing with two possibilities. One is that the change only happened to ETAs and not the ground truth. Then we could further investigate if anything such as a recent product launch changed the calculation of ETAs. Another possibility is that both the ETA and the actual time of arrival increased steadily for a while. Then there might be a big problem because it means that it takes longer for the riders to get a ride, and it's possible that we will lose riders if the trend continues. In that case, it's worth investigating the number of riders and drivers. If the number of riders increased or the number of drivers decreased, both would indicate that we don't have enough drivers to serve riders. Then it takes longer for riders to get a ride, therefore the average ETA goes up. Those are a few initial steps I would follow to diagnose the issue. Would you like me to dive into any of the factors or to continue with more analysis, assuming none of the situations is happening? Let's assume that none of the situation is happening. How would you proceed to diagnose the issue? Sure, if none of the above issue is happening, I would further segment the metric by different dimensions, such as region and platform. For region, I would check whether the change has happened in all geographic regions or it was only happening in an isolated region. If it only happened in a particular region, the problem might be related to specific things of that region, such as traffic conditions. For example, if it happened when the weather was not good, then the bad traffic condition may have caused the increase of ETAs. Or if there's a special or big event in a certain region, it's possible that the higher demand of that day has caused an increase in the average ETA. Another factor I would check is whether the changes happen on a specific platform, like iOS, Android, or web. If so, we could investigate if any bugs were introduced by a recent release or feature launch on that platform. Both of these will help us narrow down the issue. Does it make sense to you? Do you want me to do further analysis to diagnose the issue, or shall I go ahead summarizing my approach? That sounds like a reasonable approach. You could go ahead summarizing it. Okay, in summary, my approach to finding the cause of increasing average ETA is as follows. I started by understanding the data so that I could discard issues related to outliers. Then I dug deeper to identify what factors could affect average ETAs to increase suddenly or progressively. Then I look at whether the change was regional or platform specific. Let's now take some time to analyze the interview. One thing you may have noticed is that the interviewee did not follow the framework step by step. After clarifying the question, the first factor she mentioned was related to the metric itself, if there's an outlier or not, because an outlier would significantly change the metric. As I mentioned earlier, if you can come up with something that's more specific to the question itself, it's much better than following the framework blindly to answer the question. Another thing that's important is to interact with the interviewer. For metric interviews, the interviewee will dominate the interview, basically doing the talking most of the time. But it's always recommended to confirm with the interviewer whether your approach makes sense or if the interviewer wants you to further clarify or dive into any of the factors you've mentioned. Because metric questions are open-ended, the interaction with the interviewer could help convince them that you are able to explain everything you come up with and your approach is robust. So there you go. I have just shared one possible answer to a Lyft metric interview question. I hope it helps you with answering similar types of questions. If you see any interview question on the internet or you were asked in one of your interviews and you feel it's pretty hard to provide a good answer, let me know. Feel free to drop a comment below. Make sure you are not breaking the NDA if it's from your own interview experience. I'm going to provide guidance on how to answer each of them, and I will select a few of them to make videos to help you answer them better. That is all for today's video. Stay tuned, I will see you soon.